Good day. Of all the vehicles and vessels that Star Wars introduced, the X-Wing is probably the second most famous, because nothing tops the Millennium Falcon.
It got a great deal of screen time and really was one of the embodiments of Star Wars. And as one would expect, it was featured in a great deal of expanded universe media.
Today, we're going to take a look at Star Wars X-Wing Book 4, The Bacta War. Now, before we actually get into the book itself, we're first going to take a look at the background of both the X-Wing series and Rouge Squadron.
The first mention of Rouge Squadron was in Empire Strikes Back. At the time, it was called Rogue Group and was commanded by Luke Skywalker. It was built out of the remnants of Red Squadron from A New Hope. All two of them. Luke Skywalker's tenure as commander would be chronicled in the Rogue Squadron video games. Now, after the Battle of Hoth, the second survivor of the Battle of Yavin, Wedge Antilles, would take over as squadron commander.
Now, Wedge Antilles is a pretty significant character, seeing as how he survived all three films. He fought at the Battle of Yavin, he fought at the Battle of Hoth, and he actually made the killing shot at the Battle of Endor. And let's face it, at the Battle of Hoth, even Luke got shot down at that one.
And most importantly, he made the killing shot at the Death Star. Sure, Lando helped, but we all know who really killed it.
The adventures of Rogue Squadron would continue long after the films, and they would get their start in the comic series, X-Wing Rogue Squadron.
The comic series was fairly well written, and the best way to sum it up is Star Wars meets the A-Team. In 1996, the first X-Wing novel was released, written by Micheal Stackpole, who was one of the writers of the Rogue Squadron comic series.
The first book takes place after the end of the comic series and concerns the reformation of Rogue Squadron. It also introduces all the major characters that would be seen throughout the series. In addition to all of that, it also references the X-Wing PC game, as one of the missions that Rogue Squadron undertakes is actually a mission from the game.
In Book 2, Rogue Squadron must help the New Republic capture the Imperial capital of Coruscant. In Book 3, the Rogues must stop a deadly anti-alien plague.
And thus, that brings us to Book 4. Why do a review on the fourth book of a series? Well, because Bacta War is my favorite of the entire X-Wing series. This is a book that I can pick up after a couple of months and still be completely enthralled by it. I have read this thing probably close to 5 times. It's just that good. Now, before we actually get into what takes place, let's first take a look at the cover.
The cover itself really looks quite good, but unfortunately it's terribly inaccurate. The cover is supposed to depict the Battle of Typhera, but while there were Imperator-class Star Destroyers present, they were on the side of the New Republic, and there were only 2 of the bloody things. Also, there was not a Mon Cal fleet present either. In fact, outside of the 2 Imperators, there was only a single Alderaanian war cruiser along with the snub fighters. The main thing that is missing from the cover is the Executor class Star Dreadnought, and that was present at Typhera during the battle and really would have made for a nice addition to the cover. One final thing that is actually positive is the fact that one of the X-Wings has a green color scheme. This was the color scheme used by pilot Corran Horn during the novel. One of the things I have always found annoying about the X-Wing novels is this back blurb. It reads, "They are the galaxy's most elite fighting force, and as the battle against the Empire rages, the X-Wing fighters risk life and machine to protect the Rebel Alliance. Now they must do the impossible, capture a hostile, fortified world on their own." Okay, first off, they are called Rogue Squadron. They fly X-Wings, but they themselves are not called X-Wing fighters. Second, they are not fighting for the Rebel Alliance. They are fighting for the New Republic. There is absolutely no excuse for this oversight, because this is not an early novel. This book came out in 1997, 6 years after Heir to the Empire. It's just sad, to say the least.
So while ignoring these horrid oversights, let's crack open Bacta War and take a look.
The book begins immediately after the events in the Kryptos Trap. The only thing you need to know is this. Ysain Izard has taken over the planet Typhera and thus controls the galaxy's only supply of Bacta, which is a healing agent. Izard was the head of the Empire for a time, until she was kicked off Coruscant by the New Republic. Also, for timeline purposes, this story takes place several years before the Thrawn trilogy. Essentially, the main mission of Rogue Squadron is to liberate Typhera from Izard. But of course that is far easier said than done. Even though Izard is cut off from the rest of the Empire, she has her own personal fleet. The flagship is an Executor-class Star Dreadnought called Lysenka. The Lysenka itself once housed a prison for captured New Republic prisoners. Corran Horn in the previous book escaped from it and now wants to rescue the prisoners. In addition to the SSD, Izard has 2 Imperial-class Star Destroyer Mark IIs, and finally, a Victory-class Star Destroyer. All told, this is a significant force that Rogue Squadron must contend with, especially since at book's start, they only have a single squadron of Z-95 Headhunters, ships that are basically the predecessors to the X-Wing.
You know, just for curiosity's sake, I wonder what a squadron of Z-95s would do to a fleet like this. That didn't go very well, did it? It's a good thing that Wedge Antilles does not like the tank rush. Now that being said, I'm an RTS fan, and this is a real-time strategy book. Basically, Wedge has to build his own military machine, and all he starts with is a squadron of Z-95 Headhunters. He has to, of course, get a space station to work out of. He has to upgrade the space station. He has to upgrade his equipment. He has to gather allies, get money, just like you would do in an RTS.
The book itself starts with Corran Horn mulling over whether he should leave Rogue Squadron and become one of Luke's new Jedi. He of course decides to wait until after the war with Izard is over.
Now when Horn did leave Rogue Squadron to become a Jedi, he actually got his own book that was in first person, no less. The only book in the entire Star Wars novel series that was in first person. It was called I, Jedi, and basically Corran Horn became Jedi Batman.
The book starts off fairly slow, as Wedge and company need to acquire materials before they can actually attack anything. The first thing that the rogues acquire is a space station. At first, it's a fairly basic station that is somewhat similar to DS9 in operation. It has a military component, but it also has a commercial component as well. And since the rogues are on their own, they need all the money that they can get. And it basically becomes a major smuggling port.
The reason why the rogues are working outside the New Republic on this mission is because the New Republic cannot get involved due to political reasons.
At this time, the New Republic is still in its infancy and only controls about a quarter of the galaxy. And while the New Republic is trying to actively liberate many planets from Imperial oppression, some of the more free planets cannot be won over through force of arms. They instead have to be convinced to join. That being said, when Izard showed up over Typhera with her fleet, the Typherans elected her chief of state. So, that being said, the New Republic cannot attack it because it would basically make them look bad.
So let's face it, even when humanity becomes energy beings, there's still going to be political issues. Hell, there still are political issues. If you remember from Stargate SG-1, the Ascended Ancients were human, and they were energy beings, and yet they still had to deal with politics. It seems that no matter what humanity does, they're still going to be drugged down by politics and politicians. If there's one constant in the universe, it's that politics and politicians will consistently screw up society no matter what.
In addition to the political issues, the New Republic is still fighting the Imperials elsewhere, and in the grand scheme of things, one warlord that is in control of a fairly small number of planets is not that large of a concern.
So after they get a hold of the station, they begin searching for supplies, and they just so happen to find an old Imperial supply dump on Tatooine.
The only thing you need to know about this is the fact that Corran Horn and Mirex Tarek go to buy it, only to find that Booster Tarek is there.
Booster Tarek is essentially a retired smuggler who was fairly successful, and he is also Mirex Tarek's father. Now, Corran Horn's father put Booster in the spice mines of Kessel, which is essentially a penal colony, for 5 years. This, of course, causes some friction between Corrin and Booster, seeing as how Corrin is in a relationship with Mirex. Thankfully, these issues never get too sitcom-y, and they never do get annoying.
So eventually, Wedge is able to get his hands on the Squadron's old X-Wings. Basically, the New Republic gave them to Wedge for really cheap. And after that, we finally get our first space battle!
Since the X-Wing series is far more realistic than the other Star Wars novels, Wedge's plan is actually fairly complex. The first targets he attacks are basically just freighters, and what he does is he confiscates cargo and either gives it away or sells it. Now this is mainly done so that Izard will send her fleet on convoy duty to try and stop them, and thus make the ship's crew tired, and also just basically get under Izard's skin, so to speak. Now the first ship they do attack is Izard's smallest ship, a Victory-class Mark II. Eventually, after attacking enough convoys, Wedge finally has enough money to upgrade the station to level 5.
More research is needed.
They don't need any research. They're buying it all from Talon Karade.
Better pronunciation is needed.
Okay, before we get to the rest of the book, I want to first talk about pronunciation for a moment. When I did my Thrawn Trilogy reviews all those years ago, I got so many comments complaining about how I pronounced different things. The worst one, of course, is Talon Karade. To me, it was Talon Karade. When I was reading the book, I saw Talon Karade. And to me, he will always be Talon Karade. Because let's face it, Talon Karade sounds like a real name, whereas Talon Card sounds like he was trying too hard to come up with a name. And so, until I am deep, deep, deep in the cold, cold ground, I will continue calling him Talon Karade, and probably even afterwards.
Okay, what was I? Oh yes! The station can now fire off hundreds of missiles, and it also has a Gravwell projector. So basically, the squadron is as ready as it's ever going to be.
So the order of battle initially was going to go like this. Wedge was going to give away the station's location in order to lure Izard's remaining 2 Star Destroyers, mainly because one defected and one was destroyed. Now, when the Lysenka, the Super Star Destroyer, showed up, it would be destroyed by the station's numerous missile launchers and thus take out the greatest threat. There would still be the one regular Star Destroyer, but what ended up happening was the 2 Star Destroyers showed up, the regular Star Destroyer threw itself into the path of the missiles, and the Lysenka escaped. But, thankfully for Rouge Squadron, the regular Super Star Destroyer decided to defect 2 seconds from being destroyed, because they actually had cognitive abilities. And so, we now have endgame. We have 1 Super Star Destroyer versus 2 M-Star Class 2s, 1 Alderaanian War Cruiser, and an unknown number of proton torpedo-armed freighters, along with 1 hero unit, Rouge Squadron. as one would expect, Rogue Squadron won. Especially seeing as how there's other books in the series. They did not actually destroy the Lysenko. Instead, the Lysenko's crew defected because they knew they were about to die and generally had access to brain power. And eventually, Lysenko would be rebuilt and would become Wedge Antilles' flagship. So, with the book over, let's take a look at two important characters.
The first is Izard. She is a basic Cobra Commander style Imperial, meaning that she is completely and utterly incompetent. And she is a good example of why Imperials, or Empires for that matter, always fail. When someone fails under Izard, they end up dead. So think about this. A 20-year veteran of the Imperial Navy fails and is killed. He is then replaced by a conscript that has maybe a year of training. You do this too many times and you are going to run out of experienced crew members really fast. And eventually you are going to have a completely inexperienced military force that will be inferior to the more experienced forces.
Another reason why her little empire failed was because she practiced the fear method of command far too often. Under certain circumstances of failure, some of her crew members' families would be killed, thus removing any real way to coerce obedience from said crew member.
Now, of all the characters in the entire Rogue Squadron series, Corran Horn is probably the best character of them all. First off, prior to joining Rogue Squadron, he was already a member of Corsac, or Corellian Security, so before he even became a fighter pilot, he was already a badass. Throughout the book, he actually has a great deal of development. At first, he is hostile against Booster, but at the end realizes that he is an idiot, and that the feud was his father's and not his. Also, he marries Mirix at the end. Big spoiler, I know.
Now after this book, the series would continue on under a different writer named Aaron Alston, and would also follow a different squadron called Wraith Squadron. Essentially, Wraith Squadron was the Black Sheep Squadron in the Star Wars universe. Now, some like to say that the Alston books are better than the books written by Micheal Stackpole, but I have to disagree. I like the Stackpole books far more than I ever did the Alstons. But then again, it's really just splitting hairs. It just depends on which one you like more, because they're both really, really quite good. Now, as of this recording, I've also heard that there's going to be another Rogue Squadron book in 2012, and I, for one, am really quite excited. So this is GeneralLotz saying, stay on target.
They're too close!
Stay on target.
Loosen up!
Too late!